All right, so this is going to be over universal waste labeling, basically what is universal waste and how to label the waste. And most of this is covered in that initial RCRA waste training, the big long video, but I thought it was important to go ahead and do a separate one because universal waste labeling is super duper specific in terms of the phrases that are used and how we label them. So it's important that everybody understands and is on the same page in terms of how this kind of stuff must be labeled. So what is universal waste? Basically, the EPA designated certain types of waste as universal waste because it's easier on smaller companies regulatory-wise, and it encourages people to recycle these types of waste. Basically, it's types of waste that would usually be hazardous, but instead they're under this umbrella of universal waste that has more relaxed regulatory restrictions. So includes batteries, bulbs, so light bulbs, mercury-containing equipment, which would be like thermometers and stuff, and hazardous paints, which is Texas only. So if you're in Colorado, it's not universal paint waste up there. It's just hazardous paint. So batteries includes alkaline, lead acid, lithium ion, nickel cadmium, etc. So any of these batteries. When you're making a label, let's say you've got a little bucket that's full of batteries that you picked up from a customer. Obviously, you would have used a universal waste BOL, and you would indicate that it was batteries that you picked up. But you would also want to ensure that you use a universal waste label, not a HAZ label, not a non-HAZ label, but a universal waste label. And it has to say exactly universal waste dash batteries. You can't say any other variation of this. It has to say that. Like if a TCEQ investigator came to your facility, or if you're from Colorado, someone from the Colorado state up there, they would be looking for these specific phrases. So universal waste batteries. You need to have the date that the waste came to your yard, and then all of the normal customer information included on the label. So you can see, shipper's name, their address, when you first got these batteries on your yard, and then the contents. Universal waste batteries specifically. Now on to lamps. Includes fluorescent, high-intensity discharge, neon, mercury vapor, high-pressure sodium, and metal halide lamps. So any of the bulbs, any of the lamps. Basically, you want to make sure, once again, that you're using the universal waste label. Most of the time, we're going to have this kind of stuff in those big bulb boxes. A lot of times we'll get these 4-foot, 8-foot bulbs. So they'd be in the bulb boxes. Each one would need to have a universal waste label on them. It has to specifically say universal waste lamps, not universal waste bulbs or anything like that. It has to say universal waste lamps. Once again, include the date the waste came to your yard, and then the normal customer information included on the label. It's really important that you indicate the date that you guys that you intake this waste, because that's something also that an inspector investigator would look at is when did you guys receive this material. So you'd want to make sure you'd have your BOL readily available from when you initially picked it up and have it labeled properly. And includes mercury devices, another type of universal waste, so thermostats, barometers, temperature and pressure gauges, mercury switches, etc. This specific phrasing is universal waste mercury thermostats. Must say mercury thermostats. So, make sure that that's the phrasing used. This is all just for reference. If you're going to go pick up, some bulbs from a customer or some old, thermostats or whatever, you could just come and reference either this presentation, or there's been a sheet where all of this has been summarized I've sent out before, which I can resend that out if anybody needs it, but you just want to reference that and make sure you're on point with the phrasing and labeling. This is in Texas only, like I said, is universal paint waste. So what counts as universal paint waste? There's a difference between non-HAZ paints, which is like latex, water-based paints. That kind of stuff can go to the landfill. Generally considered class 2, non-hazardous waste, do a profile of landfill, no problem. But when it comes to any flammable paints or any other paints that would normally be considered hazardous, it counts in Texas as a universal paint waste. So includes spent solvents used in painting like paint thinner, lacquer, varnish. Also includes any of the PPE, rags, debris that may be contaminated with universal paint waste. Cleanup residues, paint and aerosol cans, ink. These are all universal paint waste in Texas, which means they have to go to an authorized facility, which a lot of times is like Clean Harbors, Stericycle, which is now Clean Earth. It can't just go to the landfill, basically. So in this case, the label has to state specifically universal waste, paint, and paint-related waste. So that phrasing is very specific, so you'd want that on that label. Like I said, if you're in Colorado, you would just have a normal hazardous waste label on your drums. So it would look differently than this. So go ahead and take your quiz now, answer all the questions, sign and date your name at the top and return it. Basically just to make sure that you have a full understanding of how universal waste should be labeled. Like I said, just good to go back and reference if you know you're picking up universal waste to make sure you've got your labels on point, the right paperwork, anything else you would need to pick up that waste. So